Well, we are live.
Hold on,
Once
not yet. Not
Not
yet.
yet? Okay, we're not. Okay, cool. Let me move
Pause
these.
and we're live.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, hello. I know those are the babies. Welcome everybody. This is your host Eric Saunders, Green Eyed Bandit 360 on Instagram, and as you can see, I am back. I took a vacation last month, if that's what you want to call it. It was a birthday celebration. The whole family gave me a parade, and it was awesome. So now Tamika is getting her flowers, and y'all give her a round of applause if you're watching, as she's been inducted into the Hall of Fame, and so she's on a well-deserved trip just to go out and chill and have a good time. So we are joined tonight. So we have a guest co-host who's also been a panelist in previous conversations. Has done a lot of phenomenal work inside the city, inside the Midwest, and essentially throughout the country. She's had her own talk shows and has done a lot of work with local journalism spots. So we have Miss Ebony Chappelle.
Hello.
Hi, Abby.
Hello, everyone. I thought I was still muted. There we go. Good. You guys can hear me. Happy to be here tonight alongside you, Eric, talking with this great panel of folks about a subject that is really important, and that is examining our own unconscious bias and having a conversation about how it impacts all of us. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Indeed, indeed. And so, again, if you're just tuning in, one of the things I'm doing is I'm watching you watch us. I know it's kind of weird, but if you could, if you're watching right now, go ahead and like it, share it. Let's get some folks on the horn tonight because we definitely want to know what the input is of the community around this topic of unconscious bias tonight. And so what we've just been able to do is reach out to a phenomenal panel. But before we even go around the horn, I wanted to start with our representative from AARP, who tonight's show is sponsored by. So go ahead, brother, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you, Eric and Ebony. Really appreciate the opportunity to engage with you all tonight. And special thanks and big shout out to Tamika Catchings and the team at Tease Me. Really proud of the work that you all have done throughout this series of conversations, and really looking forward to having a robust conversation about sort of our own biases and sort of how they impact our decision-making process. And so for us, I think a lot of you and a lot of the viewers are probably like, so why is AARP, interested in a topic kind of like this, or a series of topics kind of similar to the same vein? We know at AARP that disparities inhibit our ability to live longer and healthier lives. And so our job or our role as AARP Indiana is to make sure that our members are able to live a more equitable life as they age, regardless of their race, socioeconomic background. And so for us, we've sort of determined that sort of health and economics are important pieces for our work around disrupting disparities. And so our goal and our job today is sort of help to undergird organizations like the team at Tease Me that is doing work in this space and supporting and sort of inviting our members along to join the conversation and be a part of the conversation and sort of help build a more not only equitable Indianapolis, but a more equitable society as a whole. And so hopefully today's conversation, we had a chance, obviously, we were chatting backstage. I know there's a great panel of folks that are going to present to you all today. But yeah, our hope is that you all have a chance to hear from some great folks and also sort of hear from, your friends at AARP about the work that we're doing. So please visit us at www.arp.org/in to get more information. We look forward to not only being a part of this conversation, but also sort of the series of conversations that we have coming up. Really proud of Tamika Catchings and her Hall of Fame announcement. So big shout out to her and congratulations and all the best on your vacation. Enjoy your time away. So thank you, Eric and Ebony, for the opportunity, and look forward to jumping in and hearing what the folks have to say tonight.
Oh yeah,
Thank you, Marla.
definitely, guys. That was Director of Community Engagement from AARP Indiana, Mr. Manla Moyo. So again, thank you. And again, I know about that community engagement, so I'm sure you run into these biases all the time. So let's just kind of go around the room, get to know one another. Ladies first. So go ahead, Ms.
Good
Johnson.
evening, everyone. It's Crystal Johnson here, and I, like Ebony and the rest of you, are delighted to be here. I think this is a very important conversation. I think that that's the only way it's going to make any change. And so my philosophy is let's be a part of the solution, never part of the problem. So again, I'm happy to be here, and I'm ready to dig in.
Well, let's dig in. Okay, who has next?
I'll go. I'm Marlon Jackson, former Indianapolis Code, current social entrepreneur in the city of Indianapolis. Happy to be invited to be part of this conversation. Ready to share my experiences in life. This is a critical topic for this juncture that we find ourselves in history. And this is one of those ways in which we can confront this and heal this sickness of implicit bias, is by community conversations and to find common ground and understanding and not just rely on our own perception. So happy to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you. Glad to have you, man. Let's see. Thomas, here we go.
Yeah, my name is Thomas Tiarina. I'm a scholar, researcher, writer, professor. I dabble in critical race theory a lot myself and have a lot of these conversations with undergraduate as well as graduate students. So I'm pretty excited about hearing what you all have to say, and hopefully we can all learn something from each other, including the people watching.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, cool. Those are our panelists, ladies and gentlemen. We also going to be having Mr. Gary G over here. He's our visual artist this evening. And
what's up, Gary?
He's one of the real ones, I'm telling you. And so, I mean, again, I think, I don't know what he has in store for us. The mind of an artist is going to create and flow. And I've seen his work around the city. I've been knowing him for, a handful of years now. And I mean, he's been a part of this movement and revolution and Black art in general here in the city. So we are really lucky and fortunate to have him be a part of our discussion this evening, because he is definitely, in my mind, a groundbreaking and trendsetter, trailblazer artist here in the city and the Midwest. Love you, brother. You ain't even got to pay me for that. That's his love.
No, I'm sure the art is going to take us on a journey. Last summer, when the murals were going up downtown, I got a chance to stop by and talk with Gary about his mural outside the Indianapolis Opera Center, I think it is. So I'm sure tonight we are in for a treat.
Okay, well, I really just want to say, let's get it. Let's just dig our teeth in it. But I really wanted to, and I wanted to share my screen. This kind of, okay, Ron, can you give me hosting ability once again? And just kind of, it seems like we're in a place right now where it's a hot topic, and you don't know who's been grinding around, having their gears grinded for years about this same discussion that's been cloaked many different ways. I don't know if it just seems trendier because of the accessibility with social media and it's constant in your face, but I assure you, it's been the same, other than I feel like there's a certain awareness growing across other races and cultures where it's undeniable. And I've said it before on previous episodes, where now the and versus just saying it's races and races, now we're really starting to see where the lack of integrity lies for itself, making it therefore untrustworthy, making the systems, policies untrustworthy, people in positions, titles untrustworthy, leadership untrustworthy. because of the fact of we've seen how to measure integrity as a society. And you know what I'm talking about. When we first started COVID, well, we didn't start, when COVID first started on us last year, and it had one of those, I call them one of them sucker moments. You know, when we go back to 9/11, right? That was kind of the last time we said, man, we done been attacked. But then ever since 9/11, you look on the news, something else is happening. It's like, wait a minute, I thought we was in this together. And I can only imagine what it felt like being a soldier in 1865, fighting for this country with a promise that with this gun, that my freedom's just on the other side of this bullet and still come back. That's just 18. Then fast forward to World War II, and with this gun, that my freedom, and still to come back and be lynched in your uniform. So it's, again, when I say that the integrity piece, it's never had it. So here we are tonight talking about the unconscious biases, and that's just kind of my poetic rant to kind of get this thing going. My host duties, so to speak. Like I said, Ebony Chappelle, she has the fire. So we're going to be just bouncing out back and forth. But let's go ahead and get, I'm gonna bring my view down. And I wanted to ask you guys, and we can just start with whoever. What are some examples of unconscious bias in your eyes, if you want to get legit, or some things you've seen? We're going to kind of get into it, but the very general question to start us off, what are some examples of unconscious bias? And Ms. Johnson, you want to start us off?
I apologize. Yes, of course. Stating the obvious, we want to talk about race. We want to talk about sexuality biases, spiritual, religious biases. The truth of the matter is that a bias is really a prejudice. And I think that we have gotten away from that word prejudice when in fact they really mean the same thing. And that's, we all know that that's either in favor of or against one thing or another, or a group of people, or something in comparison with something else. And so just the word being, whether it's prejudice, whether it's bias, whether it's unfair, and those of us that have experienced that, it's really one and the same. So those would be some of the things that are the most obvious that need to be dealt with. Race, obviously, sexuality, spirituality, or religion. So those would be the things that I would bring to the table as an African-American woman.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate that framing, because I tend to go straight race. But then but then you break it down on those micro levels. Like I said, it's with everything. So
many different levels. Marlon, what are you thinking about?
No, well, I'm just, it's, for me, it's rooted, it's in assumptions and prejudgments based upon our own limited perception. And perception is not reality, it's simply our view from the outside. But if we're not in it, we don't know firsthand what it's like to have that experience. And that's what the root of America is rooted in, the divide between people, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, primarily, Black and white, and how this country was started on our backs. And the Constitution was written, it wasn't written necessarily for us. So then when you advance and grow within that, sociological system, and it influences all of our psyche, we know we naturally are divided, and then the time and age that we live in with misinformation through media, which is so easy because of the easy access through social media and the ability to just go off in your own pod and just ingest just Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, and then you form these thoughts and these opinions of others, but it's based upon you drinking from this one singular fountain when you actually haven't crossed over to actually see who those people really are, And for me, that's the thread of the fabric of America, where the power and the systems are maintained because of this divide, and it makes me always I think about the Willie Lynch theory, the West Indies slave owner that traumatized their slaves so then they can break them down mentally and then divide and conquer, and we don't realize it, but that's what we live in today. It just looks different, but it's a divide and conquer mentality by those that are in power to keep the others that are below them separated and looking at, well, you're Black, you're white, you're a high class, I'm low class, and just being focused on the differences and not finding commonality. Until we can find that commonality, we'll always, have our perception, stay in our bubble, and then make pass judgment on others when we don't really know what's going on with those people.
Thomas, as you answer your question, I also want to have you speak to this topic of critical race theory, because that has been a hot topic in the news as well. Matter of fact, up in Carmel, Indiana, there is a petition for them to ban the teaching of this in schools because people feel really strongly that kids should not know these things.
Fair.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which before we roll on to that, I just want to interject two things. One of which is that our natural inclination, especially you watch children, is to love one another. So then comes into play nature versus nurture. Okay. And so I don't want to come away where we're forgetting that part, because I often tell my family, you can't set in vinegar and not smell like vinegar. You're going to smell like vinegar. And so to your point, Marlon, that is exactly right. These prejudices and bias and perceptions of reality is what's fueling the fire. And when the smoke clears, you realize that there are far more commonalities than there are differences. But few people take the time or have the courage to do that. And so you're right. I wanted to speak to that. The second thing I want to speak to is that my son actually attends a Hamilton County school. And so the things that I'm seeing in some of our Facebook, our parental groups about defunding the high school, because there was a letter that went out from the superintendent about not teaching, and this started way back in February, about Black History Month. It was an issue, you guys. People are pulling their kids out of school and they want to be in a place where they want to teach your children at home, that instead of being exposed to it at school. Then they messed around and hired a Black female diversity officer. So it's crazy out here. So it's not just Carmel, it's all of Hamilton County.
It's all Hamilton County.
Yeah, a lot of stuff going on. And Thomas, I want to bring you into this conversation to bring us that perspective as someone who studies this.
Well, to go back to bias, I mean, thank you, Marlon, for bringing up media, because it totally shifted my train of thought to media bias, which totally shifts my train of thought towards confirmation bias, which I think everybody in this conversation is guilty of. I don't mean this conversation, I mean everybody in the conversation of race.
And for people that aren't familiar with that term, confirmation bias, give us a very quick definition on that.
We tend to gravitate towards what we want to hear. I think in a nutshell, that's the most simple way of putting it. And where we may view one's actions as harmful, they're surrounding themselves with social media, news networks, and things that confirm their way of thinking. One such way of thinking, like you were mentioning, is critical race theory. I mean, the reason I really believe that the reason people are so opposed to critical race theory is that it runs counter to this myth of American exceptionalism that our country was founded on, which is basically just a coping mechanism for a denial of our genocidal past and for our current racist reality. To me, critical race theory is important because it expands beyond the traditional definitions. Go back a few generations and have to do with laws in place and how those laws affect us today. I think we can take it much further back. And I think it's important to look at our history to see where we're at today and why that is. When I speak of American exceptionalism, I'm talking about, I mean, this goes back, it intersects with religious attitudes. We know that Constantine was the first to combine church and empire. Augustine with just war theory, and then 15th century, they get permission from the Pope to come over here. These things trickle down generationally. We all know how people were treated in the beginning of this country, from the natives to Jamestown to, I'm referring to 1619 now, but and so on. But these things have trickle down effects that people don't realize. I usually begin a conversation like this with students by asking them if their parents went to college and if their grandparents went to college. And then I ask them if they own land, if their grandparents own land. And I tell them my parents were migrant farm workers. We came from a different set of circumstances generationally going back. So do you think we kind of started from the same place? No, I had to get through academics the long way. And I'm glad that I did. So basically, when I'm looking at critical race theory, I'm looking at previous generations, whether we're talking about African-American groups, Latino groups, indigenous native groups, which is part of my history. And it's built into our country's DNA. My ancestors are referred to as merciless Indian savages by our Constitution in more than 2 or 3 different places. So that's the kind of attitude that carried down. I don't know if everybody's around my age. I'm 40, but I remember being younger and seeing depictions of natives on TV and just think of how different that is now.
Oh yeah.
But
they would not let those cartoons be on television now. It would be canceled. We have cancel culture now, which doesn't fix everything, but it fixed a little bit of stuff. Yeah.
But when we look at our past generations, we really do ruin this idea of American exceptionalism that, we're the best, we're doing it right, we've always done it right. It runs counter to that narrative. So I can see where the resistance comes.
Because you're disrupting people's way of life, their whole way of thinking forever. Some of us weren't lucky enough to ever be that delusional though, so we know better.
Sure.
Yeah.
So now we've, and I appreciate everybody's response, because now my mind is like, I'm actually taking notes, and I don't normally do that. But I'm sure majority of, we have that, we've gained our experience through the knowledge that we've attained, reading, studying, what have you, but most often, it's felt. And I think that's where this is coming from. Have you guys ever, or can you tell us about a time you were on the receiving end of unconscious bias, and can you kind of maybe elaborate on, what that felt like and give some context to it?
I can get started there. So my perspective is unique. Just for one, being a Black man, but then being a former professional athlete. So I have 2 things in which how people treat you, right? I was at the University of Michigan. This is post my playing career, all these different things. But I was a 2-time All-American, all these different things at the University of Michigan, well known on campus. But being in a shop on campus looking for some gear one weekend, when I was on a trip at U of M, and being profiled and followed around the store, when they didn't know that I was the athlete Marlon Jackson, the All-American, but I was just the Black man in their store, and the clerk just kept on popping up everywhere. When I turned my head, she was there. She was there behind me, following. Do you need help? Do you need assistance? And maybe implicitly she didn't know that she was realizing that she was profiling me, but that's what she was doing. And being a Black man, I've experienced this numerous times, where somebody is assuming that I am up to no good, or that I'm trying to take something, where I was a former student athlete, looking to purchase something from your store, and I've been in this store numerous times, but this time I was being profiled as if I was going to take something. And that's been my experience. And I've had that numerous times. And I've even had in times where I've gone in somewhere to do business, and the person's temperament was different when I was just a Black man coming in, but then 10 minutes later, somebody told them, oh, that's Marlon Jackson, intercepted Tom Brady, and their total demeanor changed. you know, a totally different person that I was interacting with, you know, and, you know, that's the reality of, you know, being a person, being a black man or black woman in America, is these presumptions of guilt that often accompany us when we are out in public and places doing things.
Yeah.
In one of my former positions, I was director of sales at a convention center. I lived long enough to have a couple different careers at this point, but I had someone come in for a showing. They were going to do a really large event, and it was an exclusive caterer facility. The venue had the exclusive catering contract. So I told him all the do's and don'ts and the cans and cannots. And about 2 hours after that visit, unplanned, mind you, unscheduled, I got a phone call from the same gentleman to tell me on me. He didn't know it was me. So he went on about this, you know, this black woman, and surely she had a boss, and how she told him he couldn't this, and I let him go on. I mean, this joker went on for like 15 minutes telling me all these things about this horrible black woman that had treated him so poorly, and if my boss knew, and all of that, I would sure to be in trouble. So after I let him finish, and I said, you know, I'm really sorry that was your experience and that you feel like you were treated unfairly. However, I am that awful black woman, and the buck does stop here. There is no boss. I am the boss. Click up. But I would be remiss if I did not even highlight the fact that not only do we have biases and prejudices from other races and that sort of thing, but the truth of the matter is that sometimes we even have biases amongst ourselves. I was fortunate enough to come from a two-parent home, strike. I was fortunate enough to be able to go to ballet or be a cheerleader in those things. And I take all those things and recognize them as my blessings. But what I will tell you is that was often held against me. The way that I spoke, the things that I was interested in, friend group, that sort of thing was often held against me. I can't tell you how many times I've had Black people say, "Oh, I thought you was bougie," or you all right. So it's really twofold. It's one, we do it to ourselves, and we know that our first charity and our first work starts at home. And so I think in order for this conversation to really gain some momentum and really mean something, we got to learn how to love on each other first. And then we can hold others accountable for respecting and loving on us the way that they should. So it's really twofold for me. I've experienced it externally and internally. And that was just my point for sharing both.
What are your thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I was thinking, before I share a quick example or two, you also mentioned like how you felt. I'm in a town where there's a handful of people that look like me that are not from Mexico. And I don't know if any other ones have been to college or anything, but to have these incidents happen, you asked how it felt. Like, it's very tiring to be outed as different all the time, to be reminded you're different, to be reminded maybe you don't belong here, that sort of thing. I'm speaking about myself. It's hurtful, it's tiring to do it over and over and explain things over and over. That being said, I'll give a lighthearted example or two. We have some pretty good examples out here already, but I worked for my city government for a while in community and economic development. And I remember having a meeting with our staff and a potential manufacturer coming to town at a local Mexican restaurant. And I wore a shirt and tie to work every day. I stood up to go to the restroom, and as I'm going, somebody grabs my arm, and like, it's kind of small around here. A lot of people know me. I turned around and he said, "Hey, that guy never came back with my water. Do you think you could check on that?" And I just kind of like nodded. I continued on my way. I just ignored it, and like, I use that as a lighthearted example. I mean, I still think that's funny to this day. I mean, it sucks being outed like that all the time. But the other thing would be like when I moved here 12 years ago, going to a college campus where I never spoke Spanish growing up, and instantly I would have language majors, and God bless them, they want to practice, they love language and all that. And they would come up to me, "Oh, pues ahorita que tenemos hablar en español," and I'm like, "Whoa, wait a minute. I'm from Ohio. I'm not from where you think I am," because the only other few people at that university that looked like me were from another country. Yeah, it's a pretty funny, and I speak Spanish now. That's one of the things I studied, and I traveled a lot, but I didn't when I moved here. So that was constantly pointed out to me, which kind of brings up issues of identity as well. But nonetheless, it all sucks. It's all tiring. It's exhausting to be constantly have attention drawn to the fact of what your skin looks like, basically.
Yeah. And
You
Thomas,
raised-
I appreciate you bringing that up about how exhausting it can be, because I think that, especially as people of color, other marginalized groups of people in this country, one of the things that a lot of us will rely on is the fact that our people are resilient. Like, we had to be to get this far, but at the same time, it's really, really important that we acknowledge our own humanity and our limits. Like, we all have limits at some point. Like you said, you're going to become exhausted. You're going to feel things, on a certain level, on a heart level, constantly being reminded that there are not very many safe places for you. I know as a Black woman, that is constantly a thing, wondering, like, where is it safe for me to be on this planet outside of my house, and even in my house, because you talk about Breonna Taylor in her house, so it's a lot to consider for sure. Crystal, did you have something?
No, I just wanted to tell Thomas, thank you as well for bringing it, because it is exhausting. Now, I have to be honest and say, when the gentleman called to tell me on me, it was a little gratifying. But beyond that, it is exhausting, and we should be so much further along than what we are. And so not only is it tiring, but it's also frustrating that we have to keep proving ourselves or defending ourselves, or you have to wear, Marlon has to wear Colts memorabilia just to be recognized as a human being, instead of just a man, and not even just a Black man. So I just was going to simply say thank you, Thomas, for coining that term. It's tiring.
Yeah, and I just wanted to elaborate on that as well. Just, you think about Ahmaud Arbery, and his life being taken because he was out for a jog. And that makes me think about, like, it made me think about how often I tried to make other people feel comfortable, right? Like, if I'm out at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. for a jog, and I'm passing by, an older white individual, or an individual, period, like, I'm in my mind, I'm like, man, smile, like, don't seem like you're a threat. But it's like, I don't want to be that way, but part of me automatically, goes to that type of defense mechanism where don't seem like a threat.
For survival, yeah.
But it's sad that and I got to a point that brought me to a point where I was like, I don't care no more. I'm not trying to make other people feel good about who I am and the color of my skin. Like, I don't have any time for that. Where I'm past that personally, and I hope that all of us in time get past worrying about how we're being perceived by others to make them feel comfortable.
What you done said.
Right. That's a great point too. As I try to parent a very sweet 16-year-old, 6'2", 240-pound young man. So as I prepare Big Black Jack to go out in the world, that's a whole other conversation about just empowering him with the tools to keep him safe when he's not with me.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because, and we're talking about communication. And I work at a school, Vanguard Collegiate, shout out, enrolling down grades 5 through 8, if you're looking for middle school. But, when you're in front of all these scholars every day, and it's just like communication, technology, and this, different system of values, and it's just like, man, how do we really truly prepare this generation who's gone through COVID with us, who's seen all this thing with us? How do we really begin to frame that for them to where they can really start to, I don't want to say evolve at a faster rate, to really truly be the adults that they need to be for their time, and to be innovators,
I think that's a good point, Eric, as far as like this new generation. But I think, and you, I'm sure, have noticed this, that they are just tuned into things a little bit differently. There's some hangups that they don't have that a lot of our generations had up until this point. I think about, Crystal, you mentioned this earlier, about biases against people based on their gender and sexuality. I think this new generation does not care about that as much. Like growing up, it was such a big deal. Like we were here to see gay marriage become legalized and to see people stop being discriminated against on the level that they had been up until this point. Not to say that stuff has gone away, but it's just, things are a little bit different now. So sometimes I wonder, what are the issues that they're going to have? Because it seems that younger people are a lot more open-minded when it comes to certain things now, and there's less barriers for them to jump through. So not to say that things have gone away, but yeah, how do you have those conversations given that that's where they're already at?
Or perhaps they have a different set of barriers that are not compared to the barriers different for us, because I believe that there's always been a generational bias, like you youngsters, that's how we did it in our day, and so on and so forth. And and I think that's what, because the young folks, they say, Mr. Saunders, you on Facebook? That's for old people. And I don't know people. I'm like, Facebook, what do you mean? I've only been on Facebook half my life now. So and you think about it, like, wow, that's a long time. But so again, I bring it up because even communicating this conversation and what we're hearing is going to be very interesting, communicating that to the generation that's right underneath us. So but we want to keep it moving right along, and we have, again, like we said, we have Gary G there, and he is working on something. I don't know exactly what's going on, but brother, can you come to the mic and just kind of let us know what's going on through your mind and tell us what you're hearing in this dialogue?
Well, what I'm hearing is several stories that started, they kind of raced through my mind. So, Marlon, water fountain. So the water fountain civil rights movement kind of runs through my mind. I'm talking about America. So of course we're playing with the red, the white, and the blue. I'm listening to everybody's stories of how they grew up, and I'm thinking of how I grew up. So my mind, my mother had me when she was in high school. So, people count you out automatically because your mama had you in high school. Saying she had my sisters behind me before she graduated, so she had twins. Now you got 3 kids right as you graduated. So people really counting all of us out. You know what I'm saying? My father, Vietnam vet, but he lived in Alaska majority of my life. So people really counted us out. You know what I'm saying? So just like the opposite effect of the 2-parent home being ostracized. Sometimes you get ostracized when you're in a single-parent home. Friends I might have in 2-parent homes, they might be the kids that might be doing something wild and rowdy, but I might get blamed for it. I come from a single-parent home. But ironically, though, my mother has 3 kids. All of us have college degrees. We turned out all right. You know what I mean? But yeah, so I'm just thinking also of the things that we have to eat in America. So it's just kind of running in my mind. I'm just kind of working out my visual narration of my American stories, nightmares, and unconscious biases, basically. So what it is.
Well, we shall be watching
My conversation here on the campus. Yeah.
There it is. And that's how artists do it. So we're gonna be watching, and go ahead and let your right brain free and let it all spill. So we look forward to seeing what you come up with, brother.
Hey, yay.
I wanted to address something. We have some viewers here, and we have Patty, who, has stated in the chat, it's not just skin color. She said, my granddaughter is gay and I get exhausted trying to keep up with the proper language of the LGBT community. And I'm just, Patty, I know that you're watching, and I appreciate, you just saying it as is. And I think that's important, because I feel like there is a bias that and a fear of getting it wrong.
There is.
And almost that's something I witnessed for myself. I'm not gonna, I don't know what to say hypersensitive, but it's just, I think people expect everybody to be as woke or new to this as they are. And when you're not, like you said, that's when that whole cancel mindset is as equally dangerous as a bias mindset, because you're trying to counsel a culture that you haven't fully contextualized. Again, I think, Thomas, does that kind of fit into the confirmation bias a little bit? I don't know.
Definitely.
So because it doesn't conform to my understanding and my new understanding. So,
one thing that I think about with that whole thing, and I definitely want to hear you guys' thoughts on that as well, is how powerful it can be if we're all open to learning from one another and all open to being called in as opposed to being called out, and in being called in, not be so sensitive. If somebody tells you got something wrong, like I've had this experience a few different ways. Like I've had people get things wrong about me as a Black person, as a woman, and it's one thing, when your heart is tuned toward being more understanding and compassionate, you're not so like quick to like chop somebody's head off. It's like you take a minute, like, okay, they didn't mean it like that. They just, maybe they just don't know. They're ignorant. This could be a learning experience for both of us. It's different as opposed to when someone is intentionally trying to hurt your feelings or intentionally trying to be hateful. That's something different. Even when we talk about the LGBTQIA plus community, I've met friends that I have unfortunately misgendered when we first met each other because it was new for me and there were things that I didn't know. So I would just, because my brain is geared toward, seeing things a certain way based on how society has, mainstream stuff. Sometimes we get stuff wrong because these are conversations that some of us haven't had our whole life. Like it might be something you just learned about yesterday. Like you can't expect it to be an expert, that quickly. But Thomas, definitely want to get you to jump in on this as, somebody that studies these type of things. What advice would you give to people on how to educate themselves and how to be more open, toward educating others maybe?
Well, I try to listen as much as I talk. I try to listen more than I talk. There's a lot of great resources out there. And that's something that can be difficult for minorities as well, because we want people to do the work. That can also be exhausting to put everything out there. But I mean, there's lots of great shows, books, podcasts. When Crystal was speaking, I was thinking of Between the World and Me when you were talking about your son. I don't know if you read Ta-Nehisi Coates, but has a lot of great material, a lot of great videos. Podcast is something I'm really big on. Me personally, Latino USA, Code Switch, Be the Bridge, Seeing White, Disruptive Peacemakers.
Seeing White is amazing. My job has done a podcast series on that twice, and it's
nice.
Like changed people's lives. Yeah. White is a good one.
Asian America podcast, Behind the Police, the Rooted Dialogue. I'm constantly looking for things, and if we're looking for that, then we'll come across it. As for like the importance of educating ourselves is to better have those dialogues. It's not necessarily about being right. It's just about being able to better dialogue and better explain yourself. Of course, being right is nice, but that's not always easy to accept. So, and I use the example because people always ask like, well, how do I start the conversation with a friend who disagrees with me? And
somebody actually has that in the chat right now.
Oh, really?
Yes, that very same thing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and it's a very common thing. And it starts with that education, because like for me personally, we'll take a word like white privilege that gets thrown out there. And often that's all it is thrown out there and not explained. Immediately guards go up and conversation shuts down. I couldn't explain that well until I could explain male privilege. And a lot more people agree with male privilege. And it's not hard to explain. There's certain benefits I have subtly, even subconsciously among people that you may not necessarily have. I mean, we can go into examples. I mean, like I can voice a loud opinion in a group of people and nobody's gonna call me a bitch or accuse me of being on my period, or, any number of things.
Absolutely.
I can walk through certain areas of my town.
There you go.
They're going to call you a strong male with great leadership. That's what they're going to call you, but they're going to call me an angry Black woman.
Right.
Yes.
And
I've been called all three of these things. Y'all just
Girl, me too.
Yeah. And there's not really any parts of my town that I need to worry about my physical safety or sexual assault if I'm walking alone at night. Or a college campus, I can walk through college campus alone at night and not have to worry about that sort of thing where other people do. So when we get into these examples, and then and then it's easier to explain white privilege. Like, is there anything that you benefit from that I may not, that society just kind of has leaning towards you? Like, and then we can start getting into those examples. So yeah, I mean, I just throw that out there as an example. We have to be able to dig deep ourselves and find the podcasts, find the books, find the articles, find the right shows. All the information's out there if people are willing to do the work. We can't just hand it all over. We can't. It just doesn't work that way. People will get it better if they're digging in and doing the work themselves. So work. That's what I tell people.
Absolutely, do the work. Marlon and Crystal, what y'all got to say on this?
Well, now my mind is just racing over here, and I'm thinking about great resources, but just like general virtues, values. I'm thinking empathy and grace. Like if we could take the time and stop, right, and put ourselves in someone else's shoes and think about their experience and how they're feeling, then we will be able to extend grace, right? And that's on all sides. The offender and the offended. If we could just pause for a second, and it's difficult. Empathy and grace are two extremely difficult virtues and values to put into action. I say this, but at the same time, I struggle. You know what I'm saying?
I'm glad you're mentioning that, because it is, this is not easy.
I mean, that's who can't relate to that. Like, how hard is it, like, especially when you've been offended, to stop and say, okay, this is where they may be coming from with that, or to say, what, I'm offended, but what if I found myself in a situation? Would I want forgiveness? Would I want somebody to extend forgiveness to me and forgive me? Right? Like, if you're in that position, yes, you want to be forgiven, but so often we don't want to forgive, but if we can get to a mindset where that is a part of our culture, to be able to be empathetic and to extend grace, then I think we can find some more common ground, because we can then begin to have a conversation, to have dialogue, and be able to hear one another.
Do you ever think that there's a point, though, where specifically, like, I'm thinking about Black people, and one of the images that comes to my mind is the church in Charleston, South Carolina, where the young white man Dylan Roof came in and killed all those people while they were having Bible study. And then after the fact, there were some members and some people that, were family of the people that passed away, that were saying things that were very forgiving, like in the media. And then there were some Black people like, how can you move that quickly to that? And this man just slaughtered, everybody in this church. Like, how do you, as a person that's coming from that standpoint, like, how do you reconcile stuff like that?
The Holy Spirit. I mean,
wow.
That's that's it, because love is an action word, forgiveness is an action word, searching yourself and knowing yourself. In fact, one of the things that I often recite for myself is creating me a clean heart and renew the right spirit. Because me in and of myself and of my flesh or my flush, sometimes it's not going to give people the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes that's naturally not going to be willing to forgive or understand the whys of things. If you understand why someone is behaving the way they are, then it makes it a little more palatable for you. And so to thine own self be true, know yourself, search yourself. But to answer your question specifically, Ebony, it's a choice. You are either going to choose to forgive. It is an action word and is a choice. And in order to do that, much like Thomas just talked about, having that willing spirit, you have to be willing and open for that. When David talked about that in Psalms 51:10, creating me a clean heart, that was a huge cry. He is begging for mercy and a cleansing and restoration of his own so that he could then be open to what was before him. And so until we do that, it's a very difficult road.
Yep. I could mention a friend of mine, Reverend Sharon Richwine. She lost her mother and her cousin in that shooting, and she told me she would not let him have power over her. That he would not destroy her life also. And she also told me that it would be honoring to the people that she lost, because they would do the same thing if the situation was reversed. Yeah, I really like what Marlon's putting out there with empathy. I don't know if it's the right approach to it, because I just do it myself, and it's funny because I might have students watching. When I start a class at the beginning of the semester, I tell them the goal is for you to be a more empathetic human being and for you to recognize your own ethnocentrism, those places where you may view things through your blinders. And then I ask again at the end of the semester, are you more an empathetic person now? Do you recognize some of your own faults? And I think if we approach dialogue that way, it could be a lot more constructive if we're purposely trying to become more empathetic and purposely trying to recognize those things about ourselves.
Well,
Powerful perspectives.
how do we, and I wanted to catch that thought. How do you have that discussion with someone in regards to their unconscious bias? Have you ever had to call someone out on it or bring it to their face? Have you guys done that?
Maybe once or 10 times, especially as I've navigated a career path. It's not been uncommon for me to be the only Black person, let alone the only Black female. And so we have to teach people how to treat us. And if they are unaware, I can't hold you accountable for something I've not communicated. And so I'm not going to be angry. How do we have that dialogue is just that. Having a rapport with someone and just being open and honest and communicating your own truth.
All right. Well, I gotta.
Is a start. And go ahead.
No, I'm
sorry.
I was like, I want you to tell another story of when you had to actually talk to somebody about it.
So you want a more specific example?
Yeah.
Go back. Want to know all your business, Crystal. You don't work no more.
Like Thomas said, folks might be watching and they'll know you talking about them.
But again, hey, that's how I communicate. Ain't no sense of being, passive aggressive about it. I guess I don't know.
I could mention that when I do that, I don't have any great stories about that because it's usually a personal conversation. And I tell people, it's normally like a friend, a family member, and I tell people and make sure they know, if somebody tells you or calls you out on something you did that's racist or something you said that has bias in it or prejudice, that's them trying to preserve your friendship.
Yes, that's such an excellent point. Because if you didn't care, you would just be forget them and never talk to them again. But
And there's the other side of that where we can just be reactive and throw things out there at anybody. But personally, I try not to do that. I'm sure I have at some point, but I don't have any great story about it. But I'd like to think that I try to correct people I care about.
Marlon, this is on my mind. I was just about to come to you, Marlon. I want to get off my hip and being an NFL athlete, and during the time where you see more athletes take a stand towards, but at the cost of being told you're just an athlete.
Shut up and dribble. Shut up and play. Yeah.
Shut up and dribble.
Shut up.
Lord have mercy. I mean,
I know you had some face to face or something.
Not face to face. People are more courageous on social media.
Of course.
And
yeah.
Colts fans that don't recognize that you are Black first, that you have a background, and most sometimes, I think a lot of times they understand. I've been public about my background. I come from the hood. I grew up in a single parent household. I never met my father. My mother was addicted to drugs. Like, I come from the struggle. So like everything that I feel, so like Jay-Z, when I feel it from the bottom. Like, I feel it from that place where I was, dead broke, family, didn't have anything. Right. How I move on this planet, on this earth, is from that space. So when you see me speak out and stand up for Black people and for justice, how dare you criticize me and it'd be like, oh, well, you were an athlete, you had this privilege. Like, you just totally bypassed my
privilege you broke your body to get, like
right.
And people will try to call you out on social media. Like, I can't believe you. Like, they're reprimanding you like you're some child. Like,
what part of that do you think is because they feel like they own you because of what you do is your body?
They feel like that is you. That is how they define you. And they don't see you as a human being. You are a source of entertainment,
Right. Like, you should be grateful you're making this much money. And I mean, you get paid, and now you shut up and get paid, and and I mean, I've heard it framed just like that, and they get paid all that money.
Yeah.
So they don't know what those problems are like. That's not their experience. We didn't just land here, right? There was a journey to get to this point, and that journey has shaped who we are. So when we get here, we know what it's like, the path of having nothing to having something, and we want to build a bridge to get others here. Like, that is our duty, and that is our duty. If you have gone through it, you better be looking back and building a bridge for others to cross it, right? But it's so hard for them to see that because they can't empathize. Some of them don't want to empathize. You mentioned that it's a choice. Mm-hmm. It is a choice. Forgiveness, empathy is a choice. You have to take a step towards saying, okay, I am going to be open-minded to actually looking at, well, this is where that athlete actually came from, and this is what they experienced, and this is how that may have felt, so that I can humanize them and see them as a person instead of just some source of entertainment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that you brought that up and showed a bit of your testimony. I gave a little shout out on the Facebook thread here to my brother Aaron Green with Struggle Made Me. This is him right here doing big things. Yeah. And but I brought that up, and I wanted to wear this tonight because the work that he's doing over there with Voices with Kid Wright, Brandon Randall, working with youth who have been pretty much placed in the juvenile system and in the probation system. I used to work there myself when it started off. And so I tell you, like I said, I come back, kids, because we got youth watching, want to be football players, want to, but it's interesting, man, when you actually are in those courtrooms with those young folks, when you see them on a day-to-day basis, when kids come to you and they're not, all these things are not in the fabric of their life, and there's so many opportunities for you to go to the streets and pretty much get lined up for not just, I won't say bad decisions, but decisions, the choices I only have to make per my perspective, perspective.
Or your perspective. That's right.
You know, as you said, and you know, and everybody don't get to see that little glimmer of light, you know, and say, look, I know it's a narrow path, but if I just walk it, I'm gonna be better when I get on the other side of it. But and so again, you got people, especially here in the city, that's actually talking the talk. I mean, walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And I mean, this is listening to your guys' stories. You know, again, I knew this was going to be exciting, but you know, yeah, you got to get the spirit moving. Ms. Johnson, I mean, I know I asked for some, you know, some stories.
And while I won't share things, I do believe in putting tools in the toolbox.
That's what I was going to
That's the way I parent. And so I saw in the chat that Patty Ann was asking, how do you start those conversations? And it's very, it's easy for me because I'm a communicator, but it may be difficult for others because it feels confrontational, but it really isn't. And that's what I said before. We teach people how to treat us. And when people are unaware, if we know something, it feels like some sense of responsibility to share that because it's only going to make our space better overall. And so some of the tools that I would put in the toolbox is perhaps you are not aware, but when you say X, it sounds like this, or it makes me feel. When you behave in a certain way, it makes me feel, or it sounds like X. And so I think that if we could approach those kind of conversations that way, and like Thomas said, almost like a friend. Now, you know, everybody doesn't know how to receive that. Everyone doesn't know how to be a friend or take that kind of conversation. But I think that that's a really good approach because, again, you don't want things to feel confrontational because their defense mechanism kicks in. Nobody wants to be corrected. We all want to have the richer effect. We all want to be no one wants to be made to feel like they don't know what they're doing or don't know how to talk to people, but people are unaware. And so I often ask the question to myself first and others, is your projected self in line with your real self? And when we can take a more introspective look at that, because we often send representatives and we want people to think that we're strong. We want people to think that we're smart. We want people to think that we have it all together, when in fact, none of us really do. All of us have that thing, whatever that thing is, all of us have that. All of us have our own struggles. There are things that I am not an expert about. And I think just being emotionally mature enough to say, I don't know. I think that that's a good springboard, a good starting point. You know, to your point before, talking about generational differences and some of the things that the kids deal with versus us. I've seen it with my mother. One of the words that my mother would use, opposed to my nephew, who's a sophomore at Notre Dame. The word that she would use is a generational thing. As I think about Paula Dean and everybody upset and all of that, I'm like, why? It's generational. It was geographical. So I go back to my point about.
Are you talking about when she said the N word?
Yes. Why?
Yeah, I mean, well, she was dead wrong.
Well,
Absolutely.
she was wrong. She was dead wrong. But what I'm saying is that when you understand the whys of things, it makes it a little more palatable. It was generational for her. It was geographical for her. That was a part of her conversation. Now, has she been corrected and learned differently? Go ahead.
Because they hit her in her pocketbook. And that's, you know, sometimes what needs to happen.
But what Crystal is saying is her sociological background.
That's right, Marlon.
Influenced her psychology that made her act that way. You know, and Crystal, a lot of things you're hitting like is social emotional learning. And the area to take it back, you talk about the generational differences. That's the difference with this generation. Now they're actually social emotional learning is a thing. So right. what we're talking about here, the self-awareness, the social awareness, the responsible decision-making, the relationship skills, they're being taught in school how to do this, where we had to figure it out on the run.
That's right.
Know? That's the difference in why this generation now is going to be further ahead socially and emotionally than we are.
Yeah, and you know, back to that point about someone like Paula Dean or people that come from that generation, you know, and this is not to excuse any, you know, negative behavior or, you know, just flat out, you know, like racist activities. But yeah, who would expect somebody like her, you know, a well-to-do white woman in the South, to even care not to use that word? It's her world. Like, she probably felt like, I can say whatever I want, until somebody informed her, like, okay, and you cannot actually say those type of things. So yeah, I think we are coming to a point, you know, where people are learning, like, it is unacceptable. Like, I had to have a conversation with someone about a word that I wouldn't even begin to, you know, point out, because it's just that disgusting to me. But to them, they're like, well, that's how I grew up. We said that word all the time. And I was like, okay, but we are in a different day and age now, you know. So luckily they were very open to it. Was a positive conversation, because I've had that conversation with people about this same word before, and it not being positive. Them telling me all the reasons why it was okay for them to say it, as
Right.
opposed to
And
being
that's what I was
open
going to say
to
is that
hearing
sometimes
different.
yeah, I'm sorry, Emily, but you're right. Sometimes
Mhm.
conversations don't go well. And that's where
Yeah.
we have us as the communicators, as the leaders, as the people who are more self-aware, have to be okay to agree to disagree. I did my part. I told you, now the rest is on you. What you gonna do?
Because everybody ain't gonna be so nice.
Everybody ain't.
You're gonna plant those seeds and then let them grow.
Yes,
Hey, Marlon,
that's
that's right.
positive. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you mentioned another challenge when you bring up Paula Deen in this conversation. You could say her, but we all know people who grew up. They could always say what they wanted to say and do what they wanted to do. They could go wherever they want, and you all have your own experiences. But for me, like, I knew growing up there were certain establishments I didn't go in. I remember as an elementary age kid, my father explaining to me his best way. Sorry if it offends anybody, but don't go in anywhere with an animal name. So he's talking about like elks, moose, eagles, like in my town. I don't know if that's a universal thing or not, uh, but we all grow up with these
So it's a
limitations.
universal thing to us, to a
Uh,
certain extent, because of those
It is.
social clubs.
okay,
Yeah. Yeah. So
well,
that's something that a lot of people of color were raised up,
yeah.
don't
So
affiliate. Yeah.
yeah, so we grow up with these limitations, and like sometimes it's hard for us to real. Not that maybe we feel they don't deserve it, but it's hard for us to empathize with people who like that's just they've always done whatever they wanted, said whatever they wanted, went wherever they wanted. Like it must be really weird to be stopped in your tracks. Like, whoa, what do you mean? The world's
Yeah.
mine. I can do whatever I want.
Yeah. You
I
bring
can
up
be
such
whoever I
a
want to
good
be.
point.
Sky's the
Yeah.
limit. But
Yeah,
anyway,
that's an excellent point about not being able to empathize with that, because that's a struggle that I had for a really long time as a person of color. I'll be honest to say that, because I was like, why should I go out of my way to be empathetic towards someone that, like, who, you know, my perception at the time was like they hold all the power because they can do whatever they want. But then thinking more so about the point that you brought up earlier, Thomas, about the people at Mother is a Mother Emmanuel is the church in South Carolina.
yeah.
Yeah. How the family member said, I'm not going to allow this person to have the power over my life. It wasn't until I started coming into that type of thinking that it changed for me. But you're totally right. It is hard to do that, you know, in those situations.
And Ebony, you know, right now at this moment, it's just like hearing this dialogue, and you know, again, this is one of those conversations you can go all night. But we are about 20 minutes out. But I think about it, I said, then what world are we working ourselves towards? You know, if these are the things that we're pointing out that we don't want to see, or we kind of address the problem, and it's just kind of like I know it's, you know, we talk about solutions, but it's just like, you know, it seems like we become addicted to the problems, that we don't even know what the world looks like without them. And I don't know, man. It's just like, I mean, now I'm just imagining this perfect utopia where everybody, you know, just treats everybody right, mind your own business, don't have. But I say that because then it goes deeper than that. Because as we're talking about biases, I don't want people who are listening to think that, you know, we're just talking about individual, but we're talking about when you have a bunch of individuals that have these same biases, now leads to a larger discrimination, now leads to people putting these biases into law. And
Yeah, a system.
as much as we want to make seem, oh, I can change, you can change, I don't see this, I don't see that. I said, okay, that's cool and great, but we still can't deny the fact that the danger ultimately of these biases, when they begin to become concrete in their ideology, then it becomes a method of control. And that's essentially right now, you know, disconnecting, you know, again, all these biases to the fact of, like Marlon said, like who's in control, keeping us divided. So it's just, yeah, thinking of that utopia, man. Ooh, I'm having some real Hunger Game vibes right now. You know, so
district against district. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but yet that point about, you know, what are we working ourselves towards, understanding the fact that we still exist within a system that none of us on here have the ability to dismantle. But yeah, how do you move forward in a positive direction knowing that? So yeah, what are you guys' thoughts on it? Thomas don't even want to touch it.
Moving forward starts with, I mean, you know, with the youth. And I see it as, Ebony, you stated earlier, they are far more open-minded, you know, than generations before them. And that's why the way I see the world as being more open-minded and seeing individuals as human beings and less labels. You know, that's where I see things going with the trends that we see in education, and more emphasis being put on social emotional learning. The lean towards critical race theory being within school systems to break it down through awareness and knowledge, you know, and then, you know, on the administrative level and in business, implicit bias, race and equity trainings. These are things that are confrontation, right? You know, let's confront it, let's talk about it, let's discuss it, and let's unearth it so that we can address it, heal it, and then put it in its place, and then move forward as we develop our youth, and we just shape their minds where they don't think the way that we've thought in the past, and they don't have the same habits and behaviors that we've had. That's how I see us actually getting to that utopia, as Eric put it.
That's really good, Marlon, because I had an incident not too awful long ago, and I like to think of myself as being pretty open and accepting and reflective, both introspectively and otherwise. But in addition, and because I'm in complete agreement about it being our youth. And so to take that a step further, I always want to start with me. And my son, I have my son and my nephew, and as it relates to generational and just things that we're exposed to and opening our minds, as much as we are teaching our kids, I think that we have to be open for our kids teaching us. And my son taught me something, he showed me, and I didn't like it. We were downtown, and he and my nephew were kicking a soccer ball around. And here came a same-sex couple that had huge, one was like a Dalmatian and another one was like a Great Dane. They had these great big dogs. And my son, who is now 16, says to my 12-year-old nephew, "Come on, Joe, let's go." I'm looking at him, I'm like, "What are you guys doing?" Now, in my mind, I'm thinking it's because it's this same-sex male couple that has come with their shorts and halter top on and that sort of thing with these two big dogs. I'm thinking that's why. So we get in the car, we go, Jonah falls asleep, and I say to my son, I said, "Son, why did you say let's go?" Now in my mind, I'm thinking it's because it was that same-sex couple, right? He said, "Mom, Jonah's allergic to the dogs." I felt like crap. So yes, it is our youth, Marlon. We have to show up for them and be able to help and guide, but we also have to be open for them to teach us about us and to see things from their perspective, because things are different and we don't have a good pulse on it. So what I think is okay is outdated and antiquated. So in order to be relevant, we have to be open.
Yeah.
Amen.
That's good. You think about all them sitcoms we watched and cartoons and everything that's filtered. Yeah. And yeah. Thomas,
it's funny we speak of biases, and Marlon and Crystal are talking about youth, and here I am about to talk about college age people. So yeah, speaking of bias, I don't understand. Like I think a good way. It doesn't make sense to me that you can become a counselor or a licensed therapist and never have a cultural studies or a race class. It doesn't make sense to me that you can become a teacher and never become culturally aware of things.
I would agree.
No level of cultural competency, never have to take a race class. Or we can think of any number of professions who affect even the younger generations that you all are speaking of. And I think in a perfect world, like people are going to be required, people that we look up to as mentors in the schools or extracurricular activities, coaches, like I think in a perfect world, everybody's going to have to get more education on race and culture, and whether it be about our groups or whether it be about immigrants, or like, I mean, it all needs to be put out there in most curriculum that where people become professionals in our communities. But we don't see a lot of that. What's that?
Feels like we got to start from scratch, don't it?
Yeah.
Like adults, we need to go back to school ourselves and do what we do.
And now in a really perfect utopia, since you're talking utopia now, I'm just going to throw this crazy thing out there, but because I know people I may or may not be related to or in-laws to, you start to think of people as kind of crazy, but like in the utopia, I'd love to see racism defined as a mental illness, and people need to go speak to a woke counselor, to a very woke counselor, and get help. I think if we normalize it as a mental illness, then people will be more likely to seek help. Now that's really far-fetched utopia there, but thought I'd throw it out there since you're talking utopia.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it, but then I don't want somebody talking about, well, do I get a disability check because I got the racism?
Or I forgot to take my meds this morning. That's why I called you out your name.
You can take your medicine, then it's by law that you get whooped today.
Someone's
Exactly.
tried
Put that
that.
in there,
Somebody
too.
blamed it on the medicine.
Yes.
It was an
Somebody
incident.
did. Was it like Roseanne or somebody? Yeah.
You're gonna be mad about that.
Mhm.
A diabetic and his sugar spiked, and he said something racist. He blamed it on that.
The sports broadcaster. So it's been a couple people, because he blamed it on diabetes. Somebody blamed it on having an Ambien. And I was like, okay, y'all are doing a lot. But yeah, I mean, it's good to just throw these things out there, because we the type of future that we're going to have, a lot of it is projected by the words that we speak and the things that we manifest. So if we would like to see something like that, having those it all starts with these conversations and with these ideas. I mean, I feel like I went to school tonight being in here with y'all. It's definitely helps to educate, I'm sure, lots of people, and enlighten them on these topics.
So we are in our last 10 minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have Gary come back, and then I'm going to ask everybody to kind of close us out with your final thoughts for this evening on unconscious bias. We've kind of been all over the place with it, but Gary, where you at, brother? What's on your mind?
I'm still, rolling in my little zone for a second here. Studio kind of small, working on several projects, but at the moment, can y'all see that?
We can see it.
Okay, so I got the little girl at the water fountain here, and represented in here is the red, the white, and the blue. There's a lot of blood over them water fountains throughout history. So also up in here, we got the three hangmen, like you was playing. But that's just behind the little girl. Down here in the corner, I got the black power fist, but it's grained and it's like pastel ground to give us roughness. And I got a brother that's graduating, but up under his robe, his college robe and cap, DLC. You know what I'm saying? They want brothers get degrees in prison, but they cut. I went once, actually. When I came out, I got several degrees. You know what I'm saying? Because you find out in their prison don't rehabilitate you, rehabilitate yourself. Talk about And my grandfather also has some Indian in itself, so I have stories of, a lot of like diverse cultures growing up in the background. My grandmother, her family was a line of mulattoes. So I got, this one single feather in here. Got a peace sign. I was coming up. I got the protest signs, but prevalent for me though was the little girl with the afro. You know what I'm saying? Like, just as a Black man, and we know like the strongest thing in society really has been historically the Black woman. So, when we wasn't with my mother's, I was the only male in the house. So Christina's stories, and as well as Marlon, that it started in the with the water fountain, and it just started making me think logically throughout history. A lot of times I've had conversations, military towns, from the prison, higher education, just artists, just regular people. I grew up on Brookside at first too, which at the time in like the 70s and 80s, it still had a lot of racial tensions, but then there was people in the neighborhood that was cool. So like some of the colors and the riff is just playing off, listen to the context of y'all conversation, but just a lot of implicit biases like people have, like they just look at somebody and they assume that they're one way versus another. We was raised, just because somebody's Black don't mean they're your friend, and just because they white don't mean they're your enemy. You know what I'm saying? So just in context, these are just the things I'm playing about. So some of it also hit like shut up and dribble, which we know is always true. Like we have conversations with people where we're the only one there, and it's like, oh, well, you're different. What makes me different just because you know me? You know what I mean? So these are just some of the things that are going through my mind as I'm listening to the context of the conversation, thinking of how America was from the inception of people I know, like my grandparents, what I'm saying? Like I was going back to the context of when people would say, oh, you should forget slavery. So I say, all right, if I take slavery off the table, we can go back to the civil rights era. You know what I'm saying? So that's in this timeline, because people say, oh, if it's 400 years ago, it's nothing. But so that was in that, that era. So when my mother went to school, started school, segregated. And I didn't think of that, you know what I'm saying? Until one day you just have these different conversations, or like how Thomas was saying, there's certain places where we just instinctively know we can't go, you know what I'm saying? Or that was the stigma around it, like you shouldn't be here, So basically that's just where I've been going in just listening to the conversation and reflecting on kind of what we know to have been, 1400s to the 1800s, 2000s, I mean, we see the span. I mean, it's very ridiculous. I mean, even if you think about this, and we talk about how society has changed, so we was all talking about TV raised on cartoons. A lot of the cartoons that we laughed at is we didn't know how racist or some of the effects about something. But like I say, you can start. I always say TV isn't even 100 years old. You know what I'm saying? Because my mother, him was one of the two families on the block with a TV, and people would come like they was coming to a movie to watch. So you laugh when you think about things like that. But it really wasn't that long ago. And growing up, we were watching reruns. Lucy and Desi would be in opposite beds. Now, in primetime TV, it's a whole different ballpark in daytime TV shows. So you just see how society has changed. And it's like, to be inclusive of everybody, just a whole lot goes on real fast. And then some people want to hold on, I think, to their old ways too much. Yeah. Sometimes people say, oh, you should forget things, but they forget for all of us that are minorities or, come from different sectors. Like if you come from the suburbs in the city or from the inner city out to the suburbs, it's just there's always some kind of implicit bias until people get to know you. And I was having a conversation with somebody several weeks ago and said that we were to put all the races on a boat and send them out to some distant island somewhere, the problem is that the racism is already ingrained in American society. So yeah. what we all learned, you know, or like history goes to the victor. So throughout school, all been taught one account or one version of history.
Mm-hmm.
And you could go right in the library in the same schools and find the books that alter what they're teaching us in the textbooks, but the curriculum stayed the same. And probably most of our, you know what I'm saying? Any sensitivity trainings, different things like that, and technology. So it's like,
Mr. Gary, I have to thank you for your wise words. I have to make sure I get everybody in before we get this 8:30 cutoff, man. But I appreciate the OG, triple OG knowledge and the wisdom to just putting that context. And I could see the TVs and everything. He took me there. But if we could just real quick go around, you know, the same way we started, just if you could, guys, just kind of give your, you know, last little nuggets of wisdom before we tune out tonight.
I'll take a stab at that. The first thing is that I want to encourage everyone to admit that we all have our own biases, our own prejudices, and that sort of thing. I think admitting it is more than half the battle. The other thing is searching and knowing yourself. And when you recognize what those are, take the time to do the work. Take the time and be willing, like Thomas and Ebony have both said, to learn more and look for the podcast, look for the answers. And if you don't have them, then find someone that you can seek those answers from. The other thing I want to encourage folks to do is to set your boundaries and be able to communicate that, and don't hold people accountable for things that you've not told them.
There you go.
We have to, that's the only way we're going to change the culture as a whole, is to do our part. And then remembering in that forgiveness is really for us. And even if someone having those difficult conversations is not an easy task, you've recognized that you showed up for you and you've shown up for them even. And that while they may not recognize it, it's okay to agree to disagree. But being just an advocate for change and culture and biases, that would be my little nutshell, is admitting that we all have them and coming from a place of vulnerability and empathy, as Marlon has talked about.
That's a good segue to Marlon. And even before we get there, you guys just tuning in, wanted to give a shout out to AARP, who was on here earlier and just kind of, again, making their, you know, decisions to do better about biases and unconscious bias. So again, thank you, AARP. I'll give you some more love before we go. Marlon.
No, I'll just piggyback off Crystal. I think she wrapped it up perfectly and touched on so many great topics. But scientifically, we can't escape it. It's a part of our neurobiology. You know, our brains are just wired that way, fight or flight. Like, we are constantly processing information and putting it into categories to protect ourselves. So sometimes when we act this way, it is out of fear and trying to protect ourselves. So in saying that, at the same time, we have to still search for the ability to be empathetic and to extend grace to others, understanding that there is a history of their sociology that is affecting their psychology, that influences the behaviors that occur in our society. So just being able to extend grace.
So I'd leave with questions that I would ask myself, that I would encourage everybody to ask. How can I be more empathetic? How can I recognize my biases, my prejudices? How can I do more work? What can I listen to? What can I watch that's going to teach me? Who can I have a conversation with? What can I Google? Because I don't have any other option right now. What can I Google that's going to help me learn about Asians, Natives, Black people, any people that we find in our communities, that we find in our schools? Like, work, do the work.
Ebony.
Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody at Tease Me. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Marlon. Thank you, Mandala, for being on earlier in AARP. And thank you, Von Watts, for getting us together from that producer chair. But yeah, this has just been a fabulous conversation. So I just want to encourage everybody. That's my cat back there, y'all. I do not have a tail. That is my cat, Opal. She wanted to join in on conversation.
Hello.
But I just wanted to say that this has been such a fabulous conversation. I hope everybody continues to stretch themselves, to love on one another and get outside this weekend. It's beautiful. And next week, stop by Tease Me, get you some tea, and sit out on the patio at Tarkington Park. But thank you guys. Good night.
You go.
Yeah, have a good night.
Thank you, Ebony. And we are about to cut out, and I'm your co-host tonight. Thank you, panelists, for being here, our producer. And again, another shout out to AARP. Appreciate you. We need more organizations to do what they did tonight. So we are tuning off. Thank you, Miss Patty told me to tell you hi, Marlon and Crystal. She appreciates you was on the chat today. She's been following us for months now. So peace, everybody. Panelists,
Night, y'all.
you stay on. Folks that's watching, we out.